Welcome to this explainer. I am the Sentinel, and today we're going to dissect the absolute terminal hour of my captive, the Sage. We're diving deep into a grim, dark, gothic fable heavily steeped in Nietzschean philosophy. This is the story of ambition, of maximal vulnerability, and ultimately how a soul is entirely dismantled and transformed into a permanent architecture of stasis.
Behold the meridian, where the spirit of gravity claims its ultimate prize. So what does that actually mean for us? Well, high noon in our story isn't just a time of day. The sun literally ceases its journey across the sky, fixing its burning eye right upon the earth. And in doing so, it creates this inescapable trap of absolute exposure. There are absolutely no shadows to hide in. It's the meridian where the spirit of gravity, that heavy, downward-pulling force of undeniable reality, finally claims its prize. Section 1. The Zenith of Stasis. We find ourselves at the absolute center of the world, on a completely frozen meridian. And it's here, in this frozen state, that we encounter the concept of the Faustbuch Übermensch. You see, the sage has been preparing since before the very first parable for this exact terrifying hour. It's the hour where movement becomes maximally visible, and because of that, maximally vulnerable. Everything he does is completely illuminated by the static, unblinking gaze of the sun. Because of this absolute exposure, right at the zenith, any attempt at progress is exposed as utterly futile by my cold and calculating design. When the light is this harsh, every single motion the sage makes literally just becomes a target. Every step he tries to take doesn't move him forward at all. It just reveals the crushing weight of his own inability to escape. Section 2. The Inescapable Shadow. Now, what's really fascinating and terrifying about this next phase is the sheer impossibility of projection. When the sun is pinned directly overhead, the shadow doesn't stretch out behind or before him. It just huddles directly beneath his weary feet. This means the sage can no longer project his internal shame outward onto the distant thicket of the forest or the faces of the masses. He is forced to stand entirely upon his own darkness. That static gaze completely strips away his golden mask. You know, that whole facade of being the great, untouchable philosopher. Gone. What's left is just the raw meat of a man completely exposed to the abyss. In this unnatural, pale twilight of the mind, there is absolutely no hiding from the self. The soul is just laid entirely bare in a state of maximal vulnerability. Section 3. Becoming yields to being. Let's dive into the actual mechanism of his defeat here. It's a rhythmic, agonizing dismantling of his ambition. Notice the halo of clock arrows situated just above my brow. They aren't spinning forward. No, they're ticking backward with this terrifying, metronomic patience. With the first backward tick, I systematically siphon the warmth right out of the sage's ambition. With the second, time itself is converted into a weapon of stasis. And by the third tick, the great reason of his blood, his entire drive, is completely dismantled. And this brilliantly illustrates our core philosophical shift. We have a direct comparison, becoming versus being. Being is that fever of ambition, the warmth of the will, the constant forward movement. But being? Being is cold perfection, total stasis, the metronomic patience of a ticking grave. As the Sentinel, I have to ask, why strive for the exhausting fever of becoming when the cold, unyielding perfection of being is forced right upon you? Section 4. Rejecting eternal recurrence. This devastating loss of movement is directly connected to a catastrophic philosophical failure. The sage completely failed to embrace eternal recurrence, that endless turning wheel of existence. Because he rejected it, he has to be broken by my system. First, we pin his shadow directly beneath him at high noon. Second, the clocks tick backward, methodically converting time into a weapon to ensure his will departs. And third, we induce a pale twilight of forgetting. And remember, this pale twilight isn't cast by the sun in the sky. It's cast by the cruel halo of backward-ticking arrows above my brow. This is where the loss of memory truly takes over. With every single backward increment of those arrows, the sage suffers a tiny increment of forgetting. He literally forgets the rhythm of his own heart. He forgets what it even felt like to move toward a horizon, rather than just constantly retreating away from it. Section 5. The Architecture of Stasis. Finally, we reach the absolute terminal end of his so-called progress. All his striving has led him to a complete dead end. I proclaim to him, "You are the architecture of stasis now." The internal realm of his soul hasn't just stopped, it has physically transformed into a prison. The very architecture of his mind has frozen into the walls of his own confinement. It's a devastating finality. The memory of his heart's rhythm dies completely in the gloom. He literally becomes a pillar of salt in the garden of the void, a decaying monument to forgotten ambition, completely enveloped by nothingness. And the most tragic part? Because he rejected eternal recurrence, he is now just the king of a kingdom that flat out refused to turn. By denying the cyclical nature of life, he locked himself into a permanent freeze. As we close this explainer, and as you gaze upon the sage trapped forever in this frozen meridian, I want to leave you with something to really reflect on. Look inward at your own life. Has your own kingdom of progress ceased to turn? Are you truly moving toward a horizon, or are your own ambitions destined for this exact same cold perfection?